You've built a life that looks solid from the outside, but on the inside, something feels stuck. No matter how much you achieve, the stress, the reactivity, and the habits keep showing up. And if you keep treating it like a discipline problem, you're going to miss the link between your childhood and what's happening now. I'm Ryan Soave, and I've spent my career helping people understand and overcome addictive behaviors. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how those childhood survival strategies are running your adult life, why traditional approaches to treating addiction often fail, and the one thing you need to understand and finally break free of the patterns that no longer serve you. Addiction isn't the real problem. In fact, the addictions that people engage in are really the solution. They're the solution that they're seeking to relieve stress, find peace, make it through the day. Now, it's a solution that becomes problematic in itself, but it's a solution nonetheless. And often when people stop drinking or using any addictive behavior, when they stop, their lives don't get better right away. In fact, often emotionally, they get worse. And that's because the solution they're seeking is to a stressor or a wound that comes from their history. And often we can trace this history back to the survival strategies and patterns that they developed in childhood. This is not an effort to find where people have had a terrible childhood or where people's parents have screwed them up. It's an effort to understand how people are shaped. When you can understand how you're shaped and how you were taught in your formative years by your caregivers, by the situations you were in, by the environment, and how to react to stress or how to react in relationships. If there was never another way taught to you, we tend to return to the automatic behaviors that were instilled in us. And we always find that they played specific roles in their families of origin. And these roles have names in psychological textbooks, but when I look at this with people, I just ask them, what's the job that they played? And some of the categories are things like the achiever, lost child, the peacemaker, maybe the surrogate spouse. And when we're looking at these, we're just trying to see what job they assumed and where is that job different than maybe what the role of a child should be. And a child really growing up in a family, and depending on their age, is really supposed to be learning and being cared for in a way that they can figure out their place in the world, that they can figure out who they are as their ego develops, and they can figure out how to be in relationships. They can figure out how to work through conflict. They can figure out, who they are authentically. This isn't a conscious process that a child is doing, but in an optimal environment, the child doesn't have to assume the roles of the parents, or they're not given jobs by the parents to, kind of make the family be okay. And these roles are not chosen by the child. And I would say that they're not even chosen by the parents or the caregivers. The caregivers unconsciously assign these roles to their children, and sometimes they're assigned in a seemingly abusive way, but oftentimes they're just part of the circumstance that the family is in. I ask my clients to look and really understand what role they played. And when they understand what role they played and how it shaped them, we often see that they're still playing that role as adults. And that role might be helpful to them as an adult, but it isn't usually helpful in all situations. That they're playing out this role, performing this job in every single situation. The challenge is when these roles are played out unconsciously and automatically in the adult life, they become lifelong traps. The achiever starts to see everything as transactional and needs to have a specific result, and they'll do anything possible to have that result. And if they don't get that result, then they're unhappy, depressed, stressed, angry. The peacemaker finds themselves in codependent relationships, trying to people please everybody and often not having boundaries in relationships. The lost child can't seem to find their identity. They're roaming through life, jumping from thing to thing, from relationship to relationship, losing themselves and others and in the circumstances that they're in. These roles, when played out in situations that don't call for them, create stress. And that leads us to a framework that's very simple that I call trauma, stress, and addiction. Trauma is the wound, stress is the relationship to the wound, and addiction or addictive-like behaviors are simply the person trying to find relief from that stress. I often use the example of a broken leg. Let's say you broke your leg when you were a child and that leg was never set properly. Then as that child grows up and becomes an adult, they may have a limp. And that limp is not the break, but that limp is the relationship to the break. That limp, which we're gonna call the stress in this framework, informs how the person walks or doesn't walk, how they run or don't run, how they participate or don't participate, how they view themselves and how they view others view them. It informs so much of life. And when the stress of all of that mental gymnastics that they're having related to that limp get big enough, they look for relief. And not all people turn to addiction, but for people that do, we often find that there is a limp that they've been carrying related to a wounding that they had earlier on. And these wounds are things that we've already survived. So by having these wounds, it does not mean that the person is screwed for the rest of their lives. It does not mean that they're going to be a victim and have to be weak. In fact, we can look at these wounds as their strength and the limps and the scars that they got from them as a remembrance to something that they were able to survive. And people don't often get there right away, but over time they can. And we cannot change the wound. We cannot change history. We cannot change the trauma, but we can change the relationship to the trauma. We can reduce the stress trauma or the wound causes in the present. And as we can reduce that stress, then the need for addiction and addictive-like behaviors starts to fade. The challenge is that once the behavior becomes addictive, it itself causes its own trauma and its own stress, and people are left with the behavior and the habit that they had. However, once we can reduce the stress related to the trauma, then it becomes much easier for people to maintain sobriety or abstinence or find a way to manage the behaviors that have led them to pain and suffering. We all have blind spots. And the thing about blind spots is we can't see them. And it's very challenging, seemingly impossible at times, to see the patterns when you're living inside of them. We need help. As a wise man once told me, he said, "Ryan, you're not qualified to grade your own paper." I can't see my own patterns, and I often can't see my own character, liabilities, and defects that are playing out. And so it's really important to begin to understand them. Work with a therapist, work with a coach. This is often a process that's done in things like 12-step recovery, where you do an inventory of your history and the patterns you're living in to really not only understand the patterns, but what are the assets and liabilities that you carry forward on a daily basis. When you can really understand these, especially when you can understand your liabilities, then you can understand why you're having the reactions you're having, and often you can reduce these reactions or even preempt them. A tool that I give all my clients and I use myself is the emotional weather map. It starts with gratitude to set a mindset, just listing a few things that you're grateful for and including some things that you're challenged by. And then what your plans are for the day, just buckets of plans so that you understand what territory you need to travel and what you might bump up against. And then spend a few moments understanding your stress level and your current emotional state. Based on what your plans are for the day and your current stress level and emotional state, you can begin to predict what you want to watch for. Maybe it's impatience or control or fear, and then what you want to strive for. If you're watching out for worry and fear, you might want to strive for acceptance and peace. This is a very simple process that requires you to first understand what your patterns are and what your character liabilities are. Because when you're watching for your liabilities and you're striving for your assets. Real recovery isn't a straight line to a final destination. It just isn't. Just like balance isn't finding ways to stand completely still. In fact, balance is finding your way in the middle of rocking left to right, forward and back, standing on one foot, standing on the other foot, almost falling down. That's balance. Recovery is the same. It's not an easy path necessarily, but it doesn't have to be a complicated one. I really believe that recovery is the ability to recognize when you're out of peace sooner or when you're in reaction sooner and being able to return to peace quicker or move out of reaction and into responsibility. It's not a straight line. It's not a final destination. In fact, it's a way to live one day at a time and really grab onto life as it comes your way. When we're oriented to thinking that one day I'll be okay, We're so results focused that we miss out on the fact that we're already okay right now. If you're able to think about the situation you're in and try to figure out a solution, chances are you're not in immediate physical danger. And if you're not in immediate physical danger, you're okay. You might not be okay in the way that you like what you're experiencing, but you have the ability to experience it, to be able to lean into the pain and experience peace in the middle of it. It's about navigating through the tough parts of life, not finding calm seas everywhere. After everything we've explored, here's what I want you to remember. The parts of you that seemed messy, dysfunctional, and even shameful were strategies, and brilliant ones. They helped you survive in an environment that left you with very few choices. You didn't choose to shut down, to overachieve, or to people please. Those were the best options you had at the time, and they worked. But now you have more options. Those same traits that helped you make it through your childhood can help you heal in adulthood if you stop fighting them and start understanding them. That it's not about becoming someone new. It's about welcoming the parts of you that got you this far and showing them that they don't have to drive anymore. So no, you're not starting from scratch, you're building from wisdom. And that's a powerful place to begin. I'll see you in the next one.